Okay, right. I think everything's on.
Okay. Like to start on time. We'll just wait another 5 minutes. So,
You're getting a video from me or you not?
I know there's no video from you.
Okay, hang on a second.
Sure. Yogita,
Okay,
you need to record only when it starts. Yeah, we can see you now, Doctor.
perfect. Hi.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much.
All good.
We'll wait just 5 more minutes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sure, take your time. Just gonna make sure these links remain neat. Give me a second.
Hi Pallavi,
Hi, whom am I saying hello to?
Mitra.
Hi, Mitra. So good to have you here. Thank you so much. So, very, very warm welcome to each one of you who's logged in today uh, to this masterclass that is being brought to you by NATCO, Mohan Foundation, and this time the Commonwealth Tribute to Life project. NATCO is the Network and Alliance of Transplant Coordinators. It's a membership-based registered trust, which is committed to both advancement of organ and tissue donation and the professional development of transplant coordinators in India. This masterclass is part of a series of online workshops that we do. We try to do one every month, and I think we this is our 10th one of this year, so we aren't doing so badly. Today's masterclass, as you know, is on writing an effective abstract. We all know whether you're working on a research paper, a thesis, a report, or even a grant proposal, crafting a concise and compelling abstract is a critical skill that can make all the difference in how your work is both perceived and understood. Because we all know an abstract is often the first and sometimes really the only part of your work that readers, editors, or reviewers will see. A well written abstract not only draws attention to your work, but it also provides a clear snapshot of your research, findings, and conclusions. On the other hand, a poorly written one can leave your audience uninterested or unclear about the value of your works. And so I would like to welcome a very special and accomplished speaker for this very important topic, Dr. Rajeev Kumar. Dr. Rajeev Kumar is a professor of urology at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. This is where he obtained all his medical training. His principal areas of clinical work are minimally invasive urology with a focus on adrenal surgeries, percutaneous stone surgery, and microsurgery for male infertility. His research interests are MR techniques for prostate cancer diagnosis and etiology of male infertility. He has published over 300 scientific articles and book chapters and delivered over 100 international lectures. Dr. Kumar was the chief editor of the Indian Journal of Urology for over 10 years and continues to serve in various editorial capacities for the Journal of Urology, National Medical Journal of India, International Journal of Urology, and Investigative and Clinical Urology. He is the immediate past president of the something that I won't pronounce properly, Society International de Urology, adjunct secretary general of the Urological Association of Asia, and a member of the American Association of Genitourinary Surgeons. Over to you, Dr. Rajeev. Thank you so much for being with us today, and the stage is all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Pallavi. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for saying those nice words. I didn't expect you to read the whole thing out, so I'll make it shorter the next time somebody asks me for one. Um, so this is the second time that I'm speaking on behalf of the Mohan Foundation. I think we did a course about 7 or 8 years ago in person in Gurgaon. So it was a nice little gathering, and I think we had fun at that meeting as well. And what I gather from the description that I've received is that we are talking primarily to transplant coordinators. uh, and there is a basic understanding of abstracts and scientific writing because most of you are believed to have written an abstract or have submitted an abstract to some society or another for presentation. Some of you have possibly also authored chapters, and everybody is a postgraduate in some specialty or another. So I'm working on certain backgrounds because what I present or what I speak would be tailored to what I think would work for you. Um, a little bit of background on what I'm saying and how I'm presenting it. Uh, the talk that I'm doing today is something that many of us do many times every year to a wide variety of audiences. The general content remains similar, but what you present and how you present it changes depending on what you expect your audience to know and also what you expect them to use it for. And therefore, let me just begin with sharing my slides. Right, I'm hoping you can all see this. Uh,
Yes, we can.
Thanks. Okay, so we're going to cover two parts in this next 45 minutes or so, and I'm going to talk to you about something which probably seems obvious. Why am I writing at all? And then once you've agreed that you do need to write, some about how you would go about writing an abstract. Um, so the most basic question is, of course, why do you wish to write? And one of the reasons why I believe you're in this seminar today is because you wish to write. You write. This is not an obligatory seminar. You're probably not a part of a curriculum that you need to attend. You need to be sitting here. You're doing it because you probably think it could help you. And therefore, you have some understanding of why you need to write. But then let's just go back to understanding the concept behind journals and the concept behind writing. Writing or writing for journals is something that's more than 300 years old. The first recorded medical science journal was somewhere in the 1600s. It was called the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. The journal, in some form, still exists today. And when we started writing, the whole idea behind writing an article was that you were doing it to help others. It was supposed to be altruistic. Uh, some researcher at some part of the world found a new discovery, wanted to communicate it to other people around the world because there were sometimes landmark discoveries. Somebody discovered antibiotics, somebody discovered anesthesia. So these were landmark discoveries which could potentially change how the world did things. And this was at a time when every discovery was massively incremental. Unlike today, when there is so much all background knowledge that your each new discovery isn't all that massive, we were looking at a time when these were indeed game-changing discoveries. Therefore, you wanted to let others around the world know that this is how I have been treating my patients, or this is what new I have found, and therefore you wanted to help your patients. That was the principal idea. It was altruistic. It was also to prevent harm. You found certain things harmed patients, and therefore you wanted to let people know, don't try this, don't do this, this harms patients. And therefore, that was the whole concept. Communicate your scientific knowledge. And since the only way of communication in that time used to be letters, physical letters, the only way of getting through to a large number of people would therefore be to put it together in a compendium, and therefore you would write a journal. That is also one of the important aspects of writing today, that you wish to communicate knowledge. And remember, it's not always positive knowledge. Many times you do something and you find that it actually doesn't help patients. And therefore, it's equally important to inform people of the harms that can potentially occur. And it's obligatory, therefore, on you to report whatever important scientific finding you have. Something very simple as, how do I go about counseling patients for organ donation when they live in a particular part of India would could very well be very different from how you go about counseling patients in another part of India. Counseling patients with a particular socio-economic strata would be very different from counseling patients in another socio-economic strata. So every small thing could potentially make a difference, and therefore it's important to share that. Another important reason why you need to write, and this is very relevant to India and parts of the world that aren't as developed as others, is what we call the 1090 gap. The 1090 gap is a principle which says that only 10% of all the science and research funding goes into treating conditions that actually affect 90% of the world's population. On the other hand, 90% of the funding goes to treat conditions that affect only 10% of the world's population. For example, things like prostate cancer. I'm a urologist, so prostate cancer is considered a big deal among urology. But the fact is that it's a disease that affects a very small number of people. It doesn't kill too many people. Yet the bulk of the funding will go into doing research into prostate cancer because that's what affects large number of people in the Western world. On the other hand, common infectious conditions which we see in India and parts of this part of the world don't get funded, don't get research money, and don't get reported because the West doesn't care. They don't need that money. Therefore, it becomes even more obligatory for us who live in India and work in this part of the world to conduct research and report our research. But then there's also a more proximate cause for writing. And this is something which everybody understands, and it is probably the one that drives most people, and it isn't wrong. Instead of writing for others, which is what I was talking about so far, it's quite okay to be writing for yourself. Uh, each one of us wants to be that golden egg among a sea of white eggs. That's how science and that's how society has trained each one of us, that each one of us wishes to stand out. When there are so many just like us, how does somebody know that you are different? You have a right. You are one among hundreds who's probably first among equals. How do you do that? So I've typically looked at it not just from the perspective of science, but also from the perspective of life in general. There are two paths that I describe to success, and the commonest successes that most humanity understands is either financial success or peer recognized success, which means either you've made tons of money. That's one way of saying that I have arrived, I have succeeded. The second way of so called success is respect or peer recognition. So there may not be tons of money in what you do, but you get respect. And that also is a sense of achievement and a sense of arrival. So there are these two ways in which most things in life are judged, and that's exactly how it is in science as well. You either make lots of money from it or you get peer recognition. So, how do you achieve such success? One way, and this is particularly true of science, is by just calling yourself a celebrity. You appear on multiple fora, you make a loud noise, you're visible on every potential social media group, and therefore everybody thinks you're a celebrity and wishes to treat you like a celebrity. It's also got a standard name now that's called an influencer. This is also what happens when you make a lot of money. So you're visible and therefore you're believed to have knowledge. On the other hand, the second way of achieving success, and this again is particularly relevant for science and medicine, is by crossing this path where you are trying to get recognition, but then there's a bunch of people who are preventing you from getting it. And that's the path that's called writing a paper. When you get peer recognition, which means how do your peers, other people in your field, know you exist, is because you've published work, and that's particularly relevant in medicine. Through your celebrity route, you may be able to get recognition from a group that's working in a specific area. But when you get recognition much beyond that specific area or that specific catchment, you need to publish. That's how people recognize your achievement. And through publication, it's much easier to gain recognition and therefore acknowledgement. But purely getting acknowledgement and being a celebrity is never going to get you a published article. Just doesn't work like that. Therefore, the more sustainable, although the more difficult way of getting recognition is through writing. I've already talked to you about the 1090 gap as being the second principal reason why we drive people and why we push people in India and the Southeast Asia and basically the global South to write. The bulk of celebrities in science appear from the Western world. On the other hand, a lot of what we do in this part of the world affects far more people than they treat. The job of a transplant coordinator is reasonably unique and way more difficult in this country than it is in the West. Probably 90% of our transplants in this country, and I look at all organs put together, are live related, whether it's kidneys or livers, which is the principal things that we do, but everything is live related. On the other hand, when you look at the Western world, 90% of their transplants or higher possibly are actually cadaveric donations. And therefore, the kind of environment that we work in this country versus the kind of environment they work in the West is completely different. And unless we are able to do our own research and publish our own work, there is no way we're going to be able to convince them of the difficulties we face or document the path to success among the patients or the families that we deal with. So then once you've decided that you do really need or you do wish to write, the most important question is there's nothing left for me to write. What should I write? Everybody's written about everything. So where is the new thing to write? And for that, like everything else in business, you need to have a unique selling proposition. You need to look at it as a uh, marketing tool. Remember that and now we're talking about both abstracts and conferences and for a full published paper. For a full published paper, the acceptance rates today in any good journal are less than 10%. Conference abstracts, on the other hand, are more easily accepted. Most conferences will accept at least 20% to 25% of the abstracts, and some of the conferences will even accept 70 to 80% of the abstracts submitted to them. But you are actually competing among a large number of colleagues who've also got work that they are publishing. So what do you wish to present that makes it interesting for people to look at you or to receive your idea? So the most important thing and the easiest thing to do, of course, would be if you had a new idea. If you've got a new idea, a new hypothesis, or a new research question, that's obviously the easiest thing to sell. But that's also the most difficult to achieve. And therefore, that's not the only thing that works. Sometimes just validating an existing practice. We talked about counseling patients to donate. Now, there is obviously a number of described methods in which you go about counseling patients to donate or relatives to counsel relatives to donate. But there may be changes that you have noticed or things that you have done in your environment which may be slightly different from what's the accepted practice. Or you may very well be validating a practice that's already been described but hasn't been done in a particular environment that you work in. All that would be valuable. And therefore, it doesn't always have to be something new. You could simply be validating an existing experience that you have, and that would also be acceptable. Then let's look at what are the golden rules of writing. When we were students doing our graduate degrees or master's degrees, many of us used to write a thesis. When you wrote a thesis, one of the basic things we were taught is to make it big, make it as large as you can. The concept used to be, or at least that's what we thought used to be, is that the larger it is, the fewer the number of people who will read it, the more likely that they will pass it without reading it. On the other hand, when you do an abstract or when you do a paper writing, it has to be exactly the opposite. If it is large, nobody's going to read it, and therefore nobody's going to accept it. You need to make it short. You also need to make it clear and easy to understand. Now, this is about language. Unfortunately, over the last couple of years, a lot of writing is happening using online tools. And many times, what an online platform gives you is something you yourself don't understand because the language is so different from your own language that it's difficult for you to understand what's been written. Now, remember, if you are finding something difficult to understand, your reader or your reviewer is also going to find it difficult to understand. And it's equally likely that they are not going to accept what you said. So don't use high flown English. Don't use words that you can't understand. Don't use complex sentence construction. Make it simple. Make your sentences short. Make it easy to understand language. Make sure it's complete. The information that you provide in an abstract or in a full paper must include all the all the information that's relevant to that research. And misconduct. Now, misconduct is a very big topic in itself, but some very basic rules about misconduct that everybody should know. Don't copy anything. That's called plagiarism. Don't copy paste content from anything which has previously been published. Don't copy paste images. Don't copy paste diagrams just because they look nice and they fit in with what you're presenting. Don't copy paste it. That's misconduct. Don't submit journals or articles to multiple journals. That's again wrong. It's a basic rule of article writing that you're supposed to submit a journal, submit an article to only one journal at a time. Don't give false data. That's very easy to understand. If you've seen 10 patients, report on 10 patients. If you've got missing data on, let's say, 5 patients, say that I've got missing data on 5 patients. Don't try to fill in the gaps. Don't try to create information that doesn't exist. So these are basic rules which you must follow if you wish to write. And this applies both to abstracts and, of course, to the full paper. Then we come to understanding the structure of a paper. And again, although I'm going to be talking to you primarily about an abstract, the concept behind writing a full paper and writing an abstract is rather similar. There are, of course, differences, and I'll explain those differences. But to a large extent, what you're doing is writing the same thing. How you write an article typically follows a well-defined format. And this image that you see on the left-hand side of my screen, that's from a book written by somebody called Atul Gawande. I don't know how many of you have heard of him. Atul Gawande is a surgeon. He's an endocrine surgeon, practices in Boston. He's written a number of really nice books. This is one of those books that's become rather famous. It's called the Checklist Manifesto. It works on the principle that if you follow checklists, you are less likely to make mistakes. And this came from the aviation industry. Pilots, before they take off on a flight, have a paper checklist, and both the pilot and the co-pilot are required to make tick marks and see that I have checked the following things. And when you do these checklists, you make fewer errors. And this was also the genesis for the creation of this WHO surgical checklist that all hospitals, all surgeons are supposed to use in the operating rooms, that they follow a checklist. The importance of a checklist exists even in writing a paper, and I'll show that to you as we go along. How, if you follow a checklist, which means answer a specific set of questions, your writing an abstract or you're writing a paper is more likely to be complete. So when you write an abstract or you write a paper, you're typically answering 4 broad headings. And these headings were given by Sir Austin Bradford Hill. He was a scientist, clinician, who first looked at the association between smoking and lung cancer, but also gave us these guidelines on how scientific research should be communicated. So he said you should answer 4 questions when you write a paper or you write an abstract. The questions are, why are you writing? Why did you do this study? Why are you submitting an abstract? What is new? What needs to be told? So the question is, why did you start? Second, once you thought you wanted to start, what actually did you do to gather your information? The third part is, what information did you actually gather? And finally, why should I care? Just because you've done some research, followed a particular methodology, you got some results, what difference does it make to my life? Why should I be bothered? So if you've answered these 4 questions in that order, you've created a scientific article, and by extension, a scientific abstract. These 4 questions are also encapsulated in the 4 parts of every article, and that's called the introduction, the methods, the results, and the discussion. These are the 4 parts of any article. The discussion changes in an abstract in that you don't have a discussion and you only have a conclusions, but to a large extent, the concept is the same. So you answer these 4 questions. And if you answer these 4 questions in that order, you've likely completed your article or your abstract. What is the importance of the abstract? The abstract is often the only read part of the paper. I think Pallavi alluded to this when she made the initial introduction. Each one of us, when we looks at a large search engine such as PubMed or even Google for that matter, if that's what you're using for research, you identify a large number of articles that are thrown up by those search engines, and you obviously can't read all of them. Therefore, you have to pick some. How do you pick those? The first thing that you typically look at is the title. If the title is interesting, you may read the abstract, and most of the times that's all you're going to read. Now, that's not correct. Ideally, if you're reading research, you're supposed to read the full paper. But let's be honest and let's be real about what we actually do. And the fact is, most of us read only the abstract. The other good thing about the abstract is it's always free. Now, a large number of articles that you read are hidden behind paywalls because they are subscription only models, and you often may not have access to the full article. On the other hand, the abstract is always free, and therefore you can certainly read the full abstract even if you're not paying for it. If your abstract is well written, or if your abstract is what other researchers are looking for, you're more likely to get a citation. A citation means somebody quotes you when they write an article. And when you grow up in your scientific life, you want citations more than just papers. You don't want to write 20 papers which nobody has read. You want to write 5 papers which 4 other people have cited. So that increases if you've written a good abstract. And of course, you need to write it for virtually all types of articles and also all types of conference submissions. When we look at abstracts, there are typically 2 types of abstracts that we talk about. Abstracts that are submitted to journals and abstracts that are submitted to conferences. And there are subtle differences between the 2 of them. A common thing is that abstracts typically will not allow references. However, this changes in a conference submission because many conference submissions may allow you to have a reference in the abstract. That's one difference. Second, when you submit an article to a journal and you're writing the abstract for the journal article, you are not allowed to put diagrams and figures in that abstract. On the other hand, when you're submitting it for a conference proceeding, some conferences will allow diagrams and tables. In fact, most good conferences will allow it. Some may not. The third thing is, of course, word limits. When you submit to a journal, the abstract almost always has a well-defined and smaller word limit. On the other hand, when you're submitting it to conferences, they're often more liberal and allow a larger word limit on the abstract. So these are the two or three principal differences that you will encounter when you're writing an abstract. Most of us, when we submit an abstract for a conference, have already written the abstract for the full paper. Again, remember, when you're writing to a conference, your abstracts may again be of 2 types. One is if you're doing an invited talk or an invited lecture. The conference organizers may want you to give a small abstract so people know what you're talking about. That is completely different from the research abstract that we are talking about. And the research abstract is usually on its path to writing a full paper. And therefore, the abstract that you submit to a conference is likely to be a subset of an article, of an abstract that you're going to also be submitting to the journal. When you write an abstract, these are again some essential things you must remember. An abstract must be complete in itself. So even though it's a part of a journal, the abstract in itself should be complete, such that reading the abstract, you get a fair idea of what the article is all about. The ways in which abstracts are written are multiple, but there are 2 principal ways. They're called the structured and the non-structured abstracts. A structured abstract is where you are told that please write your abstract in the following 3 or 4 subheadings. And typically they are the IMRAD subheadings: introduction, methods, results, and conclusions. I remember I said you don't have a discussion in an abstract. In an article, you would have a discussion. In an abstract, you only have a conclusion. So that's a structured abstract. You have to give 4 subheadings. Sometimes you have to give more subheadings, and the journal or the conference will tell you what subheadings they want. The second way is called a non-structured abstract, in which there are no subheadings, but otherwise the content is exactly the same. So it's always more appropriate to create a structured abstract, because then that tells you the checklist. The following 4 subheadings need to be given, and then remove the subheadings you still have a non-structured abstract. The word limits when we began writing were 250. This concept of 250 came from the limits that existed in the National Library of Medicine online formats about 25, 30 years ago, when the internet had just started and there were a limit to how much could be put into one field. So that's where the abstracts word limits came. We've continued to follow it over all the years. So still most journals will ask for a 250 word abstracts, but it is still more variable today than it was in the past. And these are the parts that I talked to you about, the IMRAD. You have to have a title, an introduction, a methods, a results, and you don't have a discussion. That's important discriminator between an abstract and a full text. You only get a conclusion. So you don't discuss your findings, you summarize your findings and give a conclusion. Now let's look at what each one of these parts are in a little more detail. First is your title. And like I said about 5 minutes ago, a title is your first contact with your readers. When you do a PubMed search or when you do an abstract search, the first thing you'll get is a title. And if a title is boring or uninformative or doesn't tell the readers what it's all about, you're likely to get skipped. Therefore, it has to be descriptive. It has to be complete. Nonetheless, it can't be 100 words long. So it has to have all the content that you wish to inform, but then within a finite limit. Since this is not a research methodology talk, I will not be detailing to you what PICO means, but I'll just summarize. PICO is an acronym that's used to describe patients, intervention, comparator, and outcome. So whenever you do a research, you have to describe who did you study, what were your patients, were they patients, were they patients' relatives, what were they children, were they men, were they women, were they employed, whatever describes who you studied, that's called the patient or the population, that's the P. I is the intervention. Did you do something to them? Did you counsel them? Did you take their blood sample? Did you do a surgery? So whatever you've done as an intervention is the I. Sometimes you'll compare what you did to one group.
You've been muted. Sorry. Are you being able to unmute yourself? Yogita, you are muted Dr. Rajeev Kumar as well.
Yes, ma'am.
I think
So
I'm back
sorry.
on. Yeah, that's
Well,
okay.
apologies for that.
No problem. I think I'm back on. Perfect. So the intervention is what you did. It could be something as simple as asking questions or drawing a blood sample or counseling in a particular manner. That's intervention. The comparator is the group where you're comparing it with. So let's say you counseled one person for half an hour, another group for 2 hours. Does it make a difference whether you counsel for half an hour or 2 hours? So whatever differences you did, or sometimes you only do it to one group, but you compare it to what somebody else has done in the past. Or you could very well say, we used to do our counseling in the outpatients 2 years ago. We are now doing our counselings in the OR, or we're now doing our counselings in the ICUs. Whatever is the difference, that's the comparator. And finally, the outcomes. What were you studying? So we studied the acceptance rate. How many of them accept to a donation? How many accept to a multi-organ donation? Whatever you are assessing as the outcome is the outcome. So typically your title will give some idea of what your study is all about. Practical tips: don't use abbreviations in the title unless the abbreviation is widely known. So if you're using HIV, it's fine. If you're saying AIDS, it's fine. If you're using an abbreviation that's not as common as that, it's best not to use an abbreviation in a title. Titles which are inquisitive, asking questions, they look very interesting. Does counseling help recruit patients for donation? Sounds very interesting, but it doesn't tell me what you did. It doesn't tell me whether it's an original study, whether it's just your opinion, whether you're reviewing previous studies, whether you're looking at a particular subset of population. So it's incomplete. And therefore, the question mark titles aren't all that great in terms of science. And finally, unless the journal or the conference wants you to do it, don't put it in all caps. It's much easier to write it in a standard mixed writing rather than writing in all caps. So I'll give you some examples. You may not understand the context, but I'll just summarize. Radical nephrectomy is a surgery for treatment of kidney cancer. Now that's a very broad topic. It doesn't tell me what I did. Did I do a trial? Am I just giving you my opinion? Am I saying what people do around the world? It doesn't tell me what exactly am I doing in this study. Then the second one is slightly better. It says laparoscopic surgery for the treatment of localized kidney cancer. So again, slightly better. Now I'm focused on what I'm talking about, but I can still don't tell you what part of this am I studying. Am I saying how difficult is this surgery? Am I saying how many patients have complications? What exactly am I trying to tell you? The third one is a little better. It says 5-year survival outcome. So now reading the paper, just reading the title, people will know that this study is going to report 5-year survival outcomes. And the last one, although it's longer, is complete. It says that this is a randomized study, which means there is an intervention that's been done assessing 5-year survival of open surgery versus laparoscopic surgery for localized kidney cancer. Now, this incorporates the entire PICO. The populations are patients with T1 kidney cancer. Intervention is laparoscopic surgery. Comparator is open surgery. And the outcomes that are being assessed are cancer-specific survival. So when you've incorporated the entire PICO, that becomes a more complete title. It's obviously much longer, but when you're doing a randomized study, 20 words is acceptable on that title. So that's how you create a title. Don't just give simple things. Counseling for kidney transplant, it tells me nothing. Survival rates after kidney transplant tells me nothing. You have to go into more details than just giving that in your title. Now let's look at the second part of the abstract, and that's called the introduction. And again, my checklist. I always want the introduction to answer 3 questions. What is the problem, or what is the extent of the problem that you're talking about? What is the known information about this condition? Number 2, what is not known about this condition, or what is the knowledge gap? And number 3, therefore, what are you going to tell me? So let's say I'm focusing on my examples on transplants. So let's focus again on transplants. Let's say you're looking at survival rates between live related versus cadaveric kidney transplants. That's your topic. So your introduction could be kidney transplant in India is donation in India includes both live donation and cadaveric donation. This is the known knowledge. We do not know the survival rates of recipients of live donors versus those of cadaveric donors. That's the unknown knowledge. Therefore, we assessed this survival of live recipients versus cadaveric recipients in our hospital. That is what the study is about. So you've answered 3 questions. What is the known knowledge? What is the unknown knowledge? And therefore, how are you going to fill the knowledge gap? That's the introduction section of an abstract. And I'll give you 2 examples. This is a concept that I follow, where I see that if you read the first line, if you read the last line of an abstract, you'll understand what the entire abstract is about, or what the entire study is about, or the introduction is about. So this says early treatment of early stage prostate cancer detected through blood tests is unknown. We therefore did a trial comparing surgery versus no surgery for these patients. So known knowledge, prostate cancer can be detected through a blood test. Unknown knowledge, we do not know whether treating these patients with surgery improves survival. What am I going to do about it? I'm going to do a trial doing surgery versus observation to see whether the results are better. So if you cover these 3 points in your introduction is complete. Give you another example, and this is one of the most famous papers of all time. It's the paper written by Watson and Crick on the structure of DNA. The entire introduction is just 2 sentences long, and that's to tell you that you don't need 100 words to write an introduction. Your abstract, like I said, is only 250 words. Your introduction typically will be less than 50 words. And therefore, just writing 2 or 3 sentences which cover these 3 questions. What do I know? I know that DNA is an important salt. What do I not know? What is the structure of DNA? What am I therefore doing in this paper? I'm describing the structure of DNA. 3 important concepts covered in just 2 sentences, and that's a complete introduction. The second section of an abstract is the methods. And again, the checklist that I talked about, methods must describe the PICO, and I've described the PICO to you earlier. So your population, intervention, comparison, and outcomes. all these aspects must be described within the PICO. Now, remember, we only have 250 words to write an abstract. So you can't write the full paper here. The full paper, the methods may very well be 500 words long. But when you're writing an abstract, the introduction is typically 50 words, the methods is 50 words, the results is 100 words, and the conclusion may be between 20 to 50 words. And you can obviously juggle those 50 words around. That's a typical ratio it is. It's 1:1:2:1 or less to make sure that you've encapsulated everything. So you only have about 50 to 70 words. You can steal 20 words from the conclusion here. So you have to keep it short, but you have to be able to include the most important aspects of your methods. In an abstract, the result forms the biggest segment. This is different from a full paper. In a full paper, the discussion forms the biggest segment. In an abstract, the results form the biggest section. So therefore, here you need to give more details about what you found, because this is what decides whether your abstract is going to get accepted for publication or not. So let us say you looked at the methods and you found that you want to study 3 things. I want to look at, let's look at kidney transplants. I wanted to look at nadir creatinine within the first 1 week of a transplant. I wanted to look at hemoglobin drop. I wanted to look at urine output in the first week. And I wanted to look at graft survival at the end of 1 week. You have 4 and you want to study 4 things. If you've said these 4 things in your methods, that I will compare live related from cadaveric recipients on the 4 points, then your results must give answers to all 4 points. Don't miss one of those points out in the results. So that's how you have a checklist for the results. The checklist for the results is, what are the things I have said I will study in the methods? That's what are the outcomes I will assess. All those outcomes must be presented in the results section. That completes your checklist in the results. When you're submitting for a conference, the good thing is you may be allowed to put in tables or figures. If you're allowed to put in a table, that's really brilliant, because in a table, you can capture tons of information and you're no longer restricted by the word count. So if you've compared, let's say 20 things, and you've got a table that has 10 lines or 10 rows and 3 tables, quite okay. But you'll never be able to capture all that information in the 70 words that I gave you. Therefore, if you're allowed a table, always create a table for the results in the abstract. Similarly, if you're allowed a figure and you're showing a diagram of methodology or a diagram of outcomes, always put one in, because it allows you to present more information than your 50 or 70 words will allow you. Finally is the section on conclusions, and this is typically the shortest section. It may just be 10 to 20 words long. And your conclusion should answer your question that you raised in your introduction. In your introduction, you said, we want to compare survival between live related and cadaveric kidney donation. So your conclusion should be, we found that the survival at the end of 1 year in patients who received a live related transplant was higher by X% than patients who received a cadaveric donation. So your conclusion should be straightforward, based on the results of your study, and it should not be a thesis description. Therefore, we believe that more patients should be encouraged to undergo cadaveric donation. We believe there is a big role of transplant coordinators in doing this. All that doesn't go into the conclusions. Your conclusion is purely based on your scientific study and your results. Now, more practical tips about writing an abstract. If you're doing research and you've written a full paper, always write your abstract in the end. This is because often when you're writing a paper, you may make changes in the content of your paper. And if you've written the abstract in the beginning, you sometimes forget to make those changes in the abstract. So always write your abstract in the end. Are you getting a lot of background noise from my...
No, we are not.
Okay, perfect. Because there's a huge fogging machine working right behind me.
No.
All right, I'll carry on.
Okay.
So you always write the abstract in the absolute end. We talked about there being structured or unstructured formats. Always begin with the structured format, like I said. It's very easy to convert a structured format into an unstructured format. And if you've created a structured format, you can just move on and remove the headings and make it unstructured if that's what you like. Always start with your abstract being larger, but then remember the word limits, because many journals or many conferences will reject you simply because your abstract exceeds the word limits. So start large and then start cutting down. And it's interesting that despite all that we've published, we still, every time we write an abstract, we successfully manage to bring it down if we need to bring it down. Again, remember, if you're doing an abstract for a journal, you're not providing any information that is new and that's not given within your main article itself. So if you've done research, you've got content in your article, the abstract should not be providing new information. There is no discussion, like we have said. There should generally be no references, except if you're doing a conference abstract. Some of the conference abstracts, like I said, allow references, in which case it's fine. You can put in an abstract reference. Avoid abbreviations, both in the title and in the text. But of course, if you're using the same abbreviation multiple times in your abstract, then it's fine to put in abbreviations there. Tables, again, no tables if you're doing the paper abstract, but tables are fine and actually should be encouraged if you're doing a conference abstract. Don't copy paste. Even if you're writing an abstract from your main article, you can't copy paste from the main article and put it into the abstract. You have to write the abstract again in your own words. And of course, make sure you recheck after each revision and that your data hasn't changed. So here's the summary slide. This is the last slide that I have to talk to you about. An abstract is usually what we call the gatekeeper to your article. It's what gets people to open the door and read the article further. And if you're submitting it to a conference, acceptance, rejection, moving from an oral presentation to a poster to an unmoderated poster and stuff like that, all depends on the abstract. So spend some time. It also, if it's a part of a journal submission, it improves the likelihood that you'll actually be allowed to get into a review process. You're allowed to get publication, and therefore you'll also improve your citations. And finally, and this is common for all publications and all work that you do, keeping it simple always helps. Don't try to make it high flown. Don't try to give content that's difficult to read or understand. Make sure it's accurate, and of course, make sure it's complete. So thank you once again for the invitation, and I'll be happy to take questions if there are any.
Yeah. So, Yogita, now people, are they allowed to unmute themselves?
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah, please let people unmute themselves, and there are questions. Can I take the
Done. Ma'am, you're mute. I just,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So the kind of examples that you gave were very much of studies where you took some population, you did a study. I have questions around other kind of articles. Like me and my colleague were trying to work on an article on incentives for organ donation around the world and their relevance to um, South Asia, particularly India. So in that, how do you look at methods? We are doing a literature review. Is that a methodology? Is that how?
Right, so good question. So what you're describing is a literature review, or what's called a review article. Now, review articles are well described and have standard methodology. So for everybody who's starting out new, I would advise them to go to a website called the Equator Network, EQUATOR, Equator Network. The Equator Network has over 600 types of different guidelines on how articles are to be written. You don't need 600. When you're looking at review articles, we typically divide review articles into two types. One are called narrative reviews, and the second ones are called systematic reviews. The standard ones, or the one preferred ones, are what are called systematic reviews. And in a systematic review, there is always a methodology. In fact, both have a methodology. I'll describe the difference. In a systematic review, you predefine what are you reviewing. How did you select articles to put into your paper? So you may say, I looked at all articles in the English language published on PubMed in the last 20 years, which include the following words: counseling, grief, whatever else you're looking at, transplant, kidney, donation, whatever search words you used to identify articles which you then read and then used to create your review is what goes into the methodology. In a systematic review, the restrictions are more detailed. You also have to give details of how you accepted an article, why you rejected an article. In a narrative review, it's much less stringent, the methodology, but you still have to describe that ultimately, what is a review? A review is you looking at published articles or news articles, whatever you're looking at, compiling that information and putting it into an article. That's what a review article is. So the methodology is, how did you identify what you're going to read in order to write what you wish to write? So the equator network will give you all these guidelines, and it basically tells you that if you're writing an article of this nature, what is the information we want to see from you?
All right, anybody in the audience wants to, Jaya? Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Rajiv, I wanted to ask you, um, so do you start with writing an abstract and then go on to write the full detailed article? Or do you first finish the article and then come back to the abstract?
Okay, very good question. You always begin with the article. You always
Uh-huh.
end with the abstract. Although when you publish it, the abstract goes first, but you
Hmm.
always begin with the article. And
Okay.
I mean, I'll take you back to your school. School Pressy writing used to be a standard teaching methodology, whether you were doing it in English or you were doing it in your mother tongue or Hindi or whatever. You would be told to write a Pressy. You would be told to read a book chapter and then summarize it in 300 words. That was the exercise that abstract writing is all about. And when you write an article, again, my advice is you always write the methodology first. It's the easiest part to write. Most of the
Hmm.
times you've already written the methodology when you were submitting it for a grant proposal or for ethics approval. After the methods, you write your results. And in order to write your results, you first make your tables. That's where your data is.
Hmm.
Using your data, you write your results. Thereafter, you write your introduction and discussion. And once you're done with all this, that's when you write your abstract.
Okay. Thank you, Dr.
Sure.
Priyanka, you wanted to
Pallavi,
ask?
may I?
Yeah, please. Yeah, Sujata.
Okay. Dr. Kumar, sometimes, or most of the times, in the transplant coordinators conference, especially, we see the coordinators submitting their case studies and how to align their abstract with the structured format of IMRAD.
Okay. That's a good question again. And in fact, case studies is one of the first things that anybody will write. And therefore, case studies, again, two parts to the answer. First, go to the Equator Network. Equator Network, again, has a bunch of guidelines on how to write case series. But the simple answer is, even in a case series, what has changed is how you gather data. So this is a case series, which means you've either extracted data from records that you already had, which is called a retrospective case series, or you decided that from today onwards, I will look at the next 100 patients who come to me and I will gather some data. Or you will say that over the next 1 year, I will gather it. There is some description of how you are gathering data. That's your methods. So your case series, of course, again has a methods. We looked at patients whom we were counseling for transplants in the last 10 years or last 5 years and see how many accepted or how many declined. So that's a case series. And the methodology is, how did you find the subjects? What was the time frame? What were the questions you asked? How did you judge acceptance or decline, denial, whatever it is? That's the methods. And then when you've answered each one of those questions, that's the result. So a case series is a very standard form of article. It's, like I said, one of the first type of articles that anybody writes, and completely fits into the IMRAD format.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else has a question for Dr. Kumar?
Dr. Kumar, maybe a silly question, but should the abstract be written in active voice or passive voice?
There are no silly questions. That's the first thing that everybody is taught everywhere, and we still teach them everywhere. There's no such thing as a silly question. There are at
Okay.
least 50 other people in this class who are grateful to you for having asked that question because they didn't want to ask it themselves. So typically it's written in the past tense. The methods is always past. Results is always past. Introduction can be the present tense. In fact, it's more of a present continuous, but it is often a present tense. For example, I'll give you the example. We know that this is an introduction that I'm now speaking out to you. We know that transplant coordinators play an important role in counseling patients for donation. We do not know whether those who are fluent in two languages are better than those who are fluent only in one language. Therefore, we evaluated the success rates of coordinators who spoke only in the native language versus those who spoke in both languages to see who was more successful. So it's a mix of, we know transplant coordinators, present tense. We know that there is a difference, present tense. Therefore, we conducted a study to assess who was better, past tense. So the introduction is a mix of present and past. Methods is always past. We evaluated the success rates of bilingual transplant coordinators with unilingual transplant coordinators in our hospital in the last 1 year. We assessed these many patients and these many conferences. So this is always past. We found that the success rates of the ones who are bilingual was X. We found the success rates of the unilingual ones was X. We also found that the bilingual ones took longer and the unilingual ones took shorter, whatever. This is all past. Conclusions, therefore, we believe this is what is better, or we found this is better. If we found, it is past. We believe, present continuous. So it's a mix of present continuous and past.
But it should basically be written in active voice, right? Rather than a passive voice.
You can do it both ways. Active is generally better.
Okay.
It was found is not really nice. It takes up more words also. We found
Sure.
2 words. It was found 3 words. I would rather not waste my words.
Got it.
Anika, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Anika?
Yeah, hi, good evening. Just wanted to check if it's acceptable to, present a study at a conference which has a limited amount of time, and then if and possibly a limited audience as well, and if the same study or with greater detail can be submitted to a journal for publication as a lengthier article, and if that is acceptable, then is there some variance in the two abstracts?
Very good question, and it's perfectly fine. So you can present an abstract to 10 different conferences if they allow. Many conferences will make you sign a disclaimer that it has not been presented before. If they do that, then obviously you can't submit it again. But most conferences have no such embargo on abstracts having been previously presented. So you can present the same abstracts to multiple conferences. You can build on the abstract series. Like you said, you only had 20 subjects when you first presented it. Next year, you put in 10 more. So next conference, you presented 30. By the time you get down to publishing, you got 5 more. So the abstract that you're submitting for publication is 35. Perfectly fine. During that period, your results may have changed. Excuse me. What you found in 20 may have been different from what you found in 35. Perfectly fine. You're allowed to keep changing, keep adding, as long as you don't change the data of the first 20 that you presented. Your incremental data may change your outcomes, but you shouldn't be changing that in the first 20 you said left is left, in the second 20, in the second time you submit the abstract, you say left is right. That is cheating. But you first found in the 20, the left was right. But by the time you added 15 more, right had become right. That's perfectly fine. Your results change when you added more. But once you've published a paper, then you cannot publish it anywhere else. And then typically you cannot present at a conference. So most conferences will not want an abstract to be presented after the data has already become public in the form of a paper.
Really? Is that right, Doctor?
So most conferences will want you to sign a disclaimer that this is not published, because then you're not presenting anything new. It's already out in the public domain. All your information, all your research is already out in the public domain in the form of a paper. And so there are varying rules for varying conferences, but most of the good quality conferences will not allow you to present a paper that's already been published unless it got published in the period between your submitting it to them and they're accepting the the presentation. So for example, the deadline for abstract submission may have been April 30th. When you submit to the conference, at that time, the journal hasn't been published. The conference actually is in October. By the time the conference gets held, the paper got published in September. Most conferences will be okay with that. But if you've already published before April 30th deadline of submission, then they don't want you to submit it.
Understood. Thank you so much for the clarification.
Sure.
We can take one or two questions. Munit, you want to say something?
Yeah, Dr. Rajiv, I really want to thank you because, the 7 years back reference that you started at the beginning, this was in Chennai conference where you presented face to face, and you also made us do an exercise there, writing an
Yeah.
abstract by giving us a title. Okay, you're going to go to the market and you need to buy some gadget.
Right.
So you so you write all that. So Imrad is right from the beginning has been there in my mind in all these 6 7 years. Now, what I wanted to ask you was that our kind of subject, the organ donation, mostly what I've seen is review articles. The data that is present in the net, and we use that information to present a title, which just Pallavi mentioned in the beginning as, like we want to do something like incentives for organ donation and learnings from global practices and relevance in India. So I'm going to be going on that website that you mentioned, for
Equator Network.
guidelines. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Equator Network. But when I read articles which are not a study, so then apart from the IMRAD, there are many other
Formats,
paragraphs that are
substructures.
added. Yeah,
Yeah.
something like background, something like ground reality, something like comparisons. Like if I say, I'm saying 6 7 countries, so I would be saying, okay, this is the country, this is their law, this is their success rate, and this is their failure. Am I allowed to do that, and is it acceptable?
Right. It's a good question again, and thank you for remembering what we did so many years ago.
She's the one who reminded, who told me about you, and you must bring Dr. Rajeev Kumar.
Right. Okay. Yeah, good. So, yes, there are various forms of writing an article. And what I was talking about was typically of the medical sciences and the pure sciences. When you look at social sciences, and a lot of what you're describing would actually fit into a social science literature as well, the structure may change. The background is the same as introduction. That will keep varying even among the regular science journals. Some will call it introduction, some will call it background, some will call it objectives. That's just a change in the nomenclature. But even if you look at the social sciences journals, this format is still the same. The flow is still the same. So, for example, you're describing the role of incentives in transplant coordinators, in improving transplant coordinators' work. And you're looking at, let's say, 20 different websites. Now, each website that you're reading is effectively an article. Whether it's a news article, it's not written like a scientific journal article. The fact is, it is still citable. Every single website that you read, even if it's Wikipedia that you're quoting, it is still a quotable article. And therefore, each one of them becomes a reference. That's one part. Second is the flow. You found that England has the following practice policies. US has the following policies. This is your results. Your method was, I wanted to look at the role of incentives in improving transplantation or in improving donation. Therefore, I looked at websites or I looked at published articles between January 2020 and October 2024 for articles on the role of incentives to coordinators or incentives to families for donation. I found the following articles and I'm now summarizing the articles. So you still have IMRAD. How did you know that you wanted to look at these websites? How did you know that you want to look at only these articles? There was something going on in your brain. You said, I'm going to search for incentive. I'm going to search for organ donation. I'm going to search for success. Those are your keywords. You searched for that. That's your methodology. So whatever happened in your brain that got you to read those 4 articles or those 4 websites, that was your methods. You just have to convert what you thought into a written paragraph, and that's your methods. And what those websites told you, England does it in the following manner, and you write a paragraph on England. US does it in the following paragraph, you write a paragraph. These are all your results. This is what you found. After I searched for donation and incentives, I found that England does the following things, US does the following things, India does the following things, and now you have 10 paragraphs, one on each country. Those are your results.
Yeah, got it. Thank you so much.
Anybody for a last question? Lija, Parul, Hemal, anybody before we let Dr. Rajiv go? All right. Thank you so much, sir, for this time, for your wisdom, for sharing your knowledge. Really appreciate your being with us. Thank you so much.
Well, pleasure to be here, and hopefully it'll make a difference to somebody. Somebody may remember a few years down the line that we did this online. Great.
Sure, it will. It will, most definitely. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Bye. Good night.